I'm kind of surprised I haven't really heard anybody talking about the elevator and escalator problems at Rhode Island Comic Con this year. So I'm making this video in hopes of not only bringing this situation to more people's attention, but also in hopes of making sure this doesn't happen again. So before I get too far into the numbers, just a quick disclaimer. I do not hold Rhode Island Comic Con responsible for the elevator and escalator problems at this year's Rhode Island Comic Con. Unless it is proven otherwise, I consider the Rhode Island Convention Center Authority responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of their facilities, including their elevators and escalators. All of the Rhode Island Comic Con staff, guests, and volunteers I talked to this year were super kind and helpful, and I'm disappointed at the lack of care given to such an important Rhode Island event. I'm making this video in hopes of bringing awareness to the situation, since conventions and other large events should be accessible to everyone. Now, with that disclaimer out of the way, it is time to get into the meat and potatoes of this issue. So a bit of a background about the convention center, and all that good stuff. So Rhode Island Comic Con was started in 2012, and it was held in the Providence Convention Center. Providence is Rhode Island's capital, and the convention center is in the perfect location. So you do have the main convention center. However, it is also attached to a hockey arena. When I was growing up, it was called the Dunks because it was Dunkin' Donuts, but now it is currently the Amica Pavilion. It is also attached to the Omni Hotel, and there's another hotel right across the street. Since you're in the heart of Providence, you're also right near a lot of great dining options. You're right next to the mall. There's other hotels in the area, and there's plenty of things to do. So in 2018, Rhode Island Comic Con brought about $4.2 million in spending to the city. And this is just people spending their money outside of the convention. The con center also limits itself to 17,000 tickets a day being sold, according to their Wikipedia page. So I have adjusted those numbers for a bit of my own math. So the 17,000 tickets per day, I've adjusted to 50,000 total attendees. The $4.2 million in external spending in 2018, I've adjusted to $10 million taxable income. And that's meant to cover people spending outside of the convention, which I believe is what was accounted for in 2018, but also inside the convention, since, vendors have to pay tax on their income. And that's also meant to be adjusted for any sort of inflation that occurred between 2018 and now. So that $10 million taxable turns into $700,000 because the sales tax in Rhode Island is 7%. The Rhode Island Convention Center is maintained by the Rhode Island Convention Center Authority, which is a government-run operation. And I'm going to give you a quote from their website. "Our goal is to operate at the greatest public benefit at the least public cost." So that is something to keep in mind. So this year at Rhode Island Comic Con, I was a guest panelist. My panel was on Sunday. However, I was there at the con on both Saturday and Sunday. I also ended up going there on Thursday, which was before the convention, in order to pick up my badge and check out the panel room. While I was there, I noticed that at least 4 of the escalators were broken and 1 of the elevators. Now, these were in various states of repair during the weekend, but it was important to note that I have firsthand account of seeing stuff that was broken. There's a very good chance that more of the elevators and escalators were broken during the event, and I just didn't see them. However, I would say that even just having 1 of those being down for most of the weekend is pretty upsetting. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how the Rhode Island Convention Center is laid out, that's okay. I can give you a brief description. So the convention center has 5 floors to it. The first floor is on the ground level, and for the convention, that is where you enter, especially since that's where you get your tickets. You can get your tickets mailed to you, or you can pick them up the day of. So you enter on the first floor, you go through security, and then you go up the escalator or the elevators to get to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor is where the convention hall is. It's a very large space. It's really great. I love what they do with the space, especially since they're able to bring in a lot of large stuff. However, I don't really need to go into how they set things up. The other thing that's nice about the 3rd floor is that you're connected to 2 different sky bridges of sorts. You're connected to the hockey arena through a sky bridge, and then you can also get to the hotel and the nearby mall through the 3rd floor. So there's a lot of places you can go once you're at the 3rd floor. However, upstairs on the 4th and 5th floor, there's additional space. There's different panels and main events that happen on the 5th floor. There's a few different ballrooms, there's some smaller rooms, and that space does get utilized. This year, part of it was overtaken by the 501st Legion. I did not get to look as long as I wanted to at the stuff, but the photo sets looked so neat. There was also a Jim Henson museum. Our panel was on the 5th floor. And something else that's kind of nice is that the 4th floor is used for seating, and I believe there were some food options up there. So you could go to the 4th floor and kind of just sit and chill for a bit before heading back to the con. So for Rhode Island Comic Con, the whole building is used for the most part. The convention is actually so big that it's expanded not just to the convention center, but also to the Omni Hotel and the Dunkin' Donuts arena. Now these areas are a bit easier to access, just because the Omni you can get to from the hotel parking lot, the hotel lobby, the convention center, and then the Dunks you can get to from either the regular entrance for the hockey arena or the sky bridge. The other thing of note is that the hockey arena and the hotel are both run by entities separate from the convention center, and while I was there, I didn't see any issues with the elevators or escalators. However, it's not as obvious in those locations, just because the elevators and escalators at the convention center are front and center, just because of how the location's laid out, whereas at both the hotel and the hockey arena, they're a bit more discreetly located. But this is about the Rhode Island Convention Center, so that's still what we're talking about. So Rhode Island Convention Center, 5 stories. You do need to go to at least 3 of them to enjoy the convention, just because you can enter through the 3rd floor. And now, let's see. Okay, so I did some research, so thank you, Google. Shout out to the Rhode Island Comic Con Wikipedia page, because that also gave me some helpful numbers. So these numbers are fudged a little bit, and that's just because I wanted to round up and give myself some easier numbers to work with. So we had 17,000 tickets per day is the cap. So I decided on 50,000 people total being at the con. The 17,000 tickets is based on the amount of people that are allowed to be inside the convention center. So I'm going with the 50,000 attendees total over the course of 3 days. And when I say attendees, I mean people inside the convention center. The $4.2 million in spending in 2018 was people spending outside of the con. So I've adjusted that to $10 million of taxable money, or about $70,000 being brought in over the course of the weekend. So after inspecting a map of the convention center and kind of going off my own memory, I saw that there were 4 elevators marked on the map, and the escalators were a little harder to decipher, but I decided on 8 just to give myself easy numbers. So an elevator in a commercial space, much like a convention center, costs about $10,000 a year to maintain. And that is on the very upper end of the spectrum, which is what I would anticipate for something like a convention center that's going to have a lot of traffic. So that means a total of $40,000 per year. An escalator, going off the upper end, costs about $20,000 a year to maintain. With 8 escalators, that's $160,000. Combined, they need to spend about $200,000 a year to maintain those elevators and escalators. So I also did a little bit of external research, and I found out that the RICCA published an event planning guide that was last revised in May of 2021. So this was actually great because I was able to find a map, confirm that my elevator and escalator count was about right, and find out some other additional interesting things. So when you run your event, from what I could see, they don't charge for the elevators. However, you are charged to keep those escalators running. There was an escalator fee listed in the planning guide at $125 per hour. Now, it didn't specify if the $125 was a total fee or $125 per escalator. However, I decided to assume that the $125 covered all of the escalators. Now, if we also assume that they charge you for a full day, meaning you're charged for 24 hours whenever you are in the convention center, that gives us about $3,000 per day. Now, Rhode Island Comic Con is run over the course of 3 days. However, you're also allowed to go in Thursday and set up. So that gives us $12,000 in just escalator fees if they run the escalator for the full 4 days and they're billed for it being run for all 4 days. Now, you might wonder, oh, how much does that $12K contribute to that $200K maintenance fee? So $12K doesn't really put a dent in that $200K. It's only 6%. However, if we look at that taxable income that happens as a result of the convention center, the numbers start to look a little bit better. So the reason why I'm saying the $700,000 in taxable income is because the Rhode Island Convention Center is maintained by a government group, because the RICCA is part of the government. So I consider that $700,000 as a result, that was brought in as a result of sales tax from the convention being run, to be something that can be contributed towards that $200,000 maintenance fee. So just from the convention running alone, if we assume that $10 million of taxable money is brought into the city between people spending outside of the convention center and then also spending during the weekend at the con, you will cover more than enough from just 1 year of running the con to cover those maintenance fees. Now, $200,000 is about 28.57% of 70,000, which means that you could take 30% of that $700,000 and easily and comfortably cover the maintenance fees for both your elevators and escalators, and then use that extra money for something else. Now, if you wanted to hit the maintenance fees by just running your escalators, using some numbers from what I mentioned previously, $125 an hour as a flat rate for all the escalators running, and assuming that you charge for the full 24 hours in a day, it'll take you 67 days to hit $200,000. And it's actually a little bit more than $200,000, but I wanted to make sure that we definitely hit that number. Now, how does 67 days fit into a 365-day year? Well, 67 days is about 18.36% of the year. So you could comfortably run those escalators for most of the weekends, and then just a few long weekends or extra days here and there for larger events like Rhode Island Comic Con, and you could comfortably cover the maintenance costs by just using those running fees. So something else that I wanted to mention is that earlier I did say that conventions are meant to be accessible, and that's because those escalators and elevators are what make the convention center accessible. Rhode Island Comic Con is held inside of a massive building. I was using the elevators and escalators all weekend, even though I could have comfortably walked up and down the stairs. And that's because I was worried about tripping over my cosplay if I used the escalator, or if I used the stairs. So just running off of some numbers, if we assume that about 1 in every 4 guests needs to use the elevator or escalator during the con, that means that about 12,500 people over the course of the weekend need to use those elevators and escalators to go up and down the different floors. And again, this is rounding down by a lot just because the convention center is 5 stories. Now, if we look at the $700,000 made off of taxes based on our previous assumption, how much money do those 12,500 people pay from that $700,000? So if we assume that everyone at the convention pays about the same amount of money in taxes, meaning it kind of evens out per person, so 12,500 people generate $175,000 in taxes, which means that if you take the tax from 25% of the people at your event, you could probably cover a good chunk of that maintenance cost. And the reason why I'm saying that if we assume, 25% of people need to use the elevators and escalators, that's just rounding down because, like I said, the event is massive. And it kind of goes to show that even if you just use a small portion of the people there, they will generate enough money by being at your event, at being at your convention center, to cover the cost to maintain the facilities. I would say after being at the convention center this weekend, easily more than half the people there would need an elevator or escalator to go up and down. I'd also say that the elevator and the escalators are the better choice for going up and down the different floors, just because most of the stairs are not easily defined because they want you to use the elevator and escalator. So if we say, again, half the people there need to use elevators and escalators, we're then looking at $350,000 in tax being generated by people who need to use those facilities. And I'm just pointing this out because the convention center is massive and the event is massive. And I would hate for someone's event to have been ruined by the fact that the convention center can't spend a small fraction of the money generated from the con on maintaining the facilities. Rhode Island Comic-Con is a massive event held at a massive venue, and I can't imagine how much more annoying it would be to see this time and time again if you keep going to events held in this venue. The other reason why I bring it up is because it's also very possible that this happened at a smaller event, but nobody else is talking about it because it's smaller. And I don't know, I would really hate to hear that someone's convention weekend was ruined because of something as small as maintenance not being done to elevators and escalators. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm assuming that the necessary maintenance is being done on these. However, considering that I firsthand saw at least one elevator and 4 escalators broken during the event, I'm assuming that clearly not enough is being done, because why else would you see that many breaking during a simple 3-day event? I've been going to conventions since 2006, including ones held at Rhode Island Convention Center, and I cannot think of a single event that I have been to where so much of the necessary infrastructure has broken during the event. I do not blame the maintenance workers for how long it took to put these things back together, because I know that technology is finicky and these necessary fixtures of the convention space probably take a while to fix and get up and running, especially since you have to walk up and down all those stairs to bring your equipment with you. Doesn't anybody at the RICCA even care about an event that is so important to Rhode Island? I mean, again, going off the 2018 numbers, even if we assume that the 2018 number is what's being used now, if we assume my $10 million was inaccurate, $4.2 million is being brought to the city of Providence as a result of this event. And I know that the Rhode Island Convention Center is running events throughout the year. This event is clearly important to so many people. There were people flying in from across the country and around the world to come to this event, to come to your convention center. And the least you can do is make sure that your facilities are at least usable for the attendees and people who want to work and see what is going on here. And like I said, I'm kind of just making this video to try and bring some awareness to it in hopes of not seeing this happen again. Rhode Island Comic-Con was my first big convention that I went to in 2015, and it was really special to me this year being able to be a guest panelist and run a panel with a friend. And I would hate to find out that someone else's convention experience was ruined because of something as silly as the elevator not working or having to wait for an escalator to go downstairs. Yeah. I really didn't plan much in terms of how to end this video, other than just saying, if you have anything else to add, leave it in the comments. If you were there this year, let me know if you saw the panel. Yeah, I kind of just have my numbers here, but yeah, I think it's really shameful that so much of the necessary infrastructure for the convention center was broken for quite a bit of the convention. And I really hope that despite the issues, people were still able to see and enjoy all of the con, because, like I said, Rhode Island Comic-Con was the first big convention that I attended, and I know that if when I went, the escalators were broken, the elevator was broken, I don't think I would have had a good experience having to, wait around to go upstairs or go downstairs and wondering if I was going to get trapped in an elevator while I was there. So, yeah, I don't really know what else to say other than Rhode Island Convention Center Authority. you guys should have the funding to keep this stuff running. Maintain it. There's nowhere else that I'm aware of in Rhode Island that's big enough to hold these events. So it's on you to make sure that these events can be held. So, yeah, that does it for today's video. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, leave a comment. I don't know. Anyway, see you in the next one. Bye.